What if I told you that in the coming years, many of the very things Americans take for granted, like our access to easy energy, cheap food and water, even the money in our pockets, could be gambled away due to history's biggest pyramid scheme? And what if I told you that the world as we know it may soon become rife with conflict and unrecognizable from the one we grew up in? All frightening concepts. But what if they're true? And what if the only ones who will escape the pyramid scheme unscathed before it collapses are those who take the proper steps now? Today, I'd like for you to join me as we investigate your future, the ultimate pyramid scheme. Hello, I'm John Daly, and I want to thank you for participating in this critical event today. For the longest time, Americans were led to believe that we lived in an age of perpetual prosperity. By now, we all know that was one all-encompassing illusion. We saw the new reality firsthand as the recession shook the very foundation of our economy. Even today, we are still struggling to rebuild our great nation. However, many voices we've come to look upon as authorities want you to believe that the worst is behind us. Are they right? Most Americans feel we are simply experiencing the calm before the storm. A recent survey found that 61% of Americans believe a historic catastrophe is looming just over the horizon. It may be an economic collapse, a terrorist attack, or a natural disaster. But only 15% feel prepared for such a deeply troubling event. In 2012, the state of Wyoming debated legislation known as the Doomsday Bill in case of events like these unfolding. And in recent years, 6 other states contemplated similar measures. The USA Today recently wrote that some experts believe that Americans should brace themselves for an economic 9/11. And the Federal Reserve has prepared a study that assesses the possibilities of a future scenario where we see a 13% jobless rate, 50% Wall Street plunge, and a further 21% decline in housing prices. People are scared, and they're concerned the days ahead will be darker and more uncertain than anything they've experienced before. Now, what if I told you that they are right to worry? That a catastrophe is not only coming, but it is a mathematical certainty. On this groundbreaking broadcast, we are going to discuss the harsh realities regarding our future with a diverse team of scientists, economists, and energy analysts. They've researched the likelihood and consequences of peak energy, American food and water shortages, resource wars, plus a coming global financial catastrophe, the likes of which the world has never seen before. And their analysis has led them to believe that our future has become one dangerous pyramid scheme that's on the verge of collapsing. And when it does, it will put your investments, your wealth, and your way of life at risk. In fact, their findings show that not only are the warning signs out there, you can easily see them by just observing an undeniable mathematical pattern, one that keeps appearing in many things critical to how our society functions. Members of this acclaimed team of experts you are going to meet today have already presented their research to governments around the world and the United Nations. And now they're going to walk you through an eye-opening and at times frightening investigation, so you can decide for yourself. And just as importantly, they're going to show you how to prepare for the future in your day-to-day life, your finances, and your investments. So before we begin, let's meet the team that will be conducting this investigation. Dr. Kent Moores is one of the world's leading energy analysts. He has advised 16 world governments on energy matters and currently serves on 2 State Department task forces, one that provides oil and energy policy to developing nations and another focused on global shale gas development. Dr. Moores also has an extensive background in counterintelligence, which has led him to be called upon regularly by the National Security Council, Department of Energy, and numerous government agencies. And until recent revisions in U.S. policy, Dr. Moores was slated to be the Deputy Director of the Iraq Reconstruction Management Office in Baghdad. Keith Fitzgerald is the chairman of the Fitzgerald Group, as well as the chief investment strategist for Money Map Press, where his daily analysis reaches 500,000 readers in 35 countries. Keith has worked with think tanks around the world using his expertise in the science of complexity and in nonlinear trends in the financial markets to help policymakers predict future events and prepare for them. Keith's investigations have resulted in him predicting the 2008 oil shock, the credit default swap crisis that helped bring about the recession, and also the Greek and European fiscal catastrophe that is still wreaking havoc to this day. His research into the coming resource wars has also made him a leading authority on determining where the next global conflicts will arise and what their trigger points will be. Chris Martinson is a highly acclaimed author and scientist with a PhD in pathology from Duke University. He is the former VP of a Fortune 300 company and has become an internationally recognized expert on the dangers of exponential growth in our energy, environment, and economy. He has presented his powerful findings at the United Nations, the UK Parliament, state legislatures across the country, and to major corporations. Now, I want to warn you in advance that some of what you are about to hear may come as a shock to the system regarding your current beliefs. But let me assure you that there is hope. Now, while the evidence is overwhelming, the next chapter of the story you are about to hear has yet to be written. So let's get started by catching up with Chris, Keith, and Kent as they lay out their plans for this investigation.
In 2002, I started taking a keen interest in exactly how the economy functions. As a pathologist, I wanted to look at it through a scientist's eyes. When I did, it wasn't long before I got this sense that a potential catastrophe was beginning to take shape. One that threatened the prosperity and well-being of all Americans and most of the world. My wife, she calls this the period I fell down the rabbit hole. What I discovered, though, is a very simple mathematical pattern that appears in many things that are critical to maintaining our way of life.
Your research has definitely created a bit of a controversy, and that's why we've all agreed to work together to investigate this pyramid scheme theory.
It's only controversial because some folks in Washington and other world governments refuse to accept reality. The proof, it's right in front of us. You can see a pyramid scheme loud and clear on a simple chart. I can just draw it on this napkin. Hey, can I borrow your pen? Sure. Our job is to show people that this pattern could rob countless innocent folks of their wealth, freedoms, and frankly, their futures. We have to open people's eyes and give them a way out.
What Chris drew on that napkin represents a dangerous pattern that our society has been built upon, an exponential growth curve. Looks harmless on that napkin, but it's very troubling when applied to the real world. With a traditional pyramid scheme, you usually have some sort of crooked operation that survives off of a constant influx of new people investing their money so that the people on the top of the pyramid get paid. You need exponential growth in the amount of investors, or else the pyramid scheme collapses when more and more people want their money back. But our pyramid scheme theory suggests something entirely different. That our way of life has been built upon unstable exponential growth needs. The problem is, exponential growth patterns don't give you an early warning sign, because the dangers really speed up at the end when it's too late to do anything about it.
Now, to maintain our current way of life, the so-called American dream, we have to rely on the false belief that we can preserve exponential growth forever in three systems: energy, the environment, and the economy. I call them the three E's. The economy on the top, with energy and the environment forming the foundation, an interconnected pyramid. Looking at that top E, the economy, our GDP is a near-perfect exponential growth curve, doubling and doubling repeatedly over the last 80 years. But something that was experiencing even more dangerous exponential growth is our total credit market debt, doubling around every 6 or 7 years since the mid-1970s.
You know, if our economy would just continue to grow infinitely, we could actually keep this going for a little while longer. But we'd also need to continue a pattern of exponential growth in our ability to find and harness more energy, grow more food from dwindling amounts of farmland, find new water sources from deeper beneath the ground, discover and mine a whole array of crucial minerals. What we're finding out more and more with each day that passes is that all of these things are finite in nature. The trick is they are absolutely necessary for maintaining our current living standards in a modernizing world with 7 billion people.
To really drive this pyramid scheme theory home, we just need to have people begin asking themselves some very important questions. What is the real fallout if the world is caught in the midst of an energy crisis? Not just oil, energy across the board. What if there's an international run on minerals, water, and food? What if we can't continue to grow these areas exponentially for a global economy that's built on infinite expansion? And what happens to America and the entire world if one piece of this puzzle falls behind, or even worse yet, all of them? We have some very real issues to address that for the first time in history may find their way to American shores. And I think that's the story people need to hear.
Let me jump in for a second. Chris, Keith, and Kent have begun to outline their pyramid scheme theory. But will this hold up to scientific scrutiny? We aim to get to the bottom of that question today by exploring dangerous exponential growth patterns in our energy, environment, and economic systems. The 3 E's. Then the team is going to connect them together to form the big picture, the pyramid, and what this means for our futures. They'll also give you their analysis on how to protect your wealth and way of life when this catastrophe truly erupts. Now, in our first segment, you will discover why militaries from around the world believe we are running straight into a full-blown energy crisis. We'll share some government reports that were never meant to be seen by the public, which may reveal that our days of easy oil are behind us. The team will assess all energy sources for their viability in helping us lessen the blow in the days after our petroleum-based economy comes to a close. But you'll see how these solutions won't be enough to stop the pyramid scheme from crashing down. And remember, Chris, Kent, and Keith are leading international experts on energy. In fact, Kent currently spends most of his time consulting with world leaders on this pressing issue. Now, for most of his career, he was on a 72-hour standby with our government for major energy issues, meaning at any time he could be taken for 3 days with no warning whatsoever to address major events in oil anywhere on the planet. So his viewpoint is not one to be taken lightly. Now, before we dive deeper into this investigation, let me say that this is a complex issue and one we don't plan on rushing through, because you deserve the truth. So don't worry about remembering every detail, because at the end of this presentation, we'll explain how you can receive a 100% free package that contains all of the proof and findings from our investigation, including an eye-opening book with information that has never been released before today. And you'll be sent reports that will reveal the steps to take to protect you and your family's wealth and way of life in the days, months, and years ahead. You are about to get the real story and real solutions for this historic crisis.
To keep this pyramid scheme from crashing down, you need exponential growth to be maintained forever in those bottom 2 E's, energy and the environment. They're the enablers of this whole setup. With that first E, energy, we can see a clear-cut case for exponential growth by simply analyzing the amount of energy we've consumed on this planet over the past 200 years or so. It looks a lot like that image I drew on the napkin. You see a long, flat period followed by a quick rise. And that pattern raises a big question. What happens to our society, our economy, and just about everything else if we can't maintain this exponential growth pattern? I think we're about to find out the answer. But you won't hear the politicians in any party or the mainstream media bring this issue up, because the big energy companies pad the donation books of everyone in DC. And big energy pays for a lot of advertising during those supposedly unbiased news programs. Money shapes the story of any issue in this country. And the story the big energy money is selling us is, we've got nothing to worry about. But they're wrong. And I believe there is no quick fix for this energy predicament.
It's amazing that in the time since we kicked off the Industrial Revolution, we have basically extracted all of the easy energy there is to be had using our past, current, and near future technologies. And we're now so far behind the curve towards mass integration of any viable alternatives like the natural gas that's here at Cove Point that our society is on the cusp of an energy shock like we've never experienced. There is no getting around this. Look at oil. New oil doesn't appear magically overnight. And neither do new oil refining processes. The amount of oil on this planet is finite. How finite is a big question on the minds of many scientists.
This is why I've taken such an interest in the idea of peak energy, peak oil in particular.
You know, guys, it wasn't all that long ago that peak oil was simply an extremist view, but the militaries of the world now seem to be taking it very seriously. In fact, they're the ones driving the research because they realize the potential impact on economies, on maintaining a stable society, on exposing weaknesses in enemies, and for identifying where geopolitical power shifts may occur, frankly. It goes so far beyond filling up at the pump, and it's absolutely essential to this pyramid scheme.
Last year, the U.S. Joint Force Command released a study warning of a coming oil crisis that could begin any minute now. They think this could be the year surplus global oil production entirely disappears. And by 2015, we may be coming up 10 million barrels short every day. But they're really only focusing on crude oil, not the alternative oil forms.
The investigation that caught my attention was the one from Germany's Federal Defense Force. This draft was never meant to be seen by the public, but in fact, it was leaked. I thought it was a game changer. This report predicted that a future of dwindling oil supplies could lead to dramatic shifts in the global balance of power and a decline in the importance of the Western industrial nations. That means us. They predicted that peak oil could bring about a total collapse of the financial markets, and serious social, political, and economic crises could strike the entire world. If people were looking for a wake-up call, this wasn't a bad one.
You know what? Germany's findings were certainly the ones that garnered the most attention, but the UK also reached similar conclusions. We know their Ministry of Defense, Bank of England, and the Department of Energy were all holding secret talks about peak oil. It is something that is way beyond the realm of conspiracy theories these days, and Americans need to prepare for it, but they also need to understand it further. Here's a quick breakdown on peak oil. It's a theory that began in the mid-1950s from a man named Marion Hubbert. Hubbert was a geoscientist who worked at the Shell Research Lab in Houston, Texas. His peak oil theory refers to the point in time where the world is unable to increase the supply of oil brought to the market because there just isn't as much to be extracted from the ground anymore. It's not a matter of running out. Let me be clear about that. But it is a matter of slowing down. The fact is, world oil discoveries peaked in the 1960s, and that while we kept producing more and more oil in the decades after the so-called peak, it became just a matter of extracting more oil at a faster rate than we were finding it. Some organizations now believe we may have already passed the peak in the amount of oil we can bring out of the ground from those very wells. Take the International Energy Agency, the IEA. Their data shows that the world may have begun to reach peak oil production around 2006. The IEA's chief economist even stated that one day we will run out of oil. Not today or tomorrow, but one day we will run out of oil. So we have to leave oil before oil leaves us. Many Americans believe we've become a net exporter of oil, and it's a very big misconception. And that's possibly why the situation isn't getting the attention it deserves. Here's the reality. We are a net exporter of oil-based products. There's a big difference between that and being a net exporter of oil itself. That just means our refineries are shipping out more and more gasoline and other products than we take in. But it's still oil we imported in the first place that we are refining and then turning around and exporting back out. The hard truth is we are very soon going to be living in a world of very expensive oil. There was a meeting last year that included some high-ranking US government and military officials. One of the participants was the National Security Advisor for President George W. Bush. He proposed a simple question. How did we let this happen? We've known we were dependent on oil for 20 years, and everybody's been talking about energy independence. How come we're at this point?
Now, if you want to know why there aren't many of the powers that be taking the peak oil situation too seriously, look at OPEC. I believe they are blatantly lying to the public about how much oil they have in their reserves. We know that while America and much of the world was seeing its production slow down back in the 1980s, somehow the Saudis were able to magically increase their proven oil reserves by as much as 127%. But here's the thing, nobody audits OPEC, but OPEC. People can say what they want about WikiLeaks, but one thing that website may have done was expose some very dirty secrets about peak oil in the Middle East. There were no less than 4 cables that were uncovered between the US Embassy and Saudi officials
that suggested that Saudi oil reserves were being overestimated by as much as 40%, and that peak oil is imminent.
The WikiLeaks weren't the only warnings of this. Oxford University believes OPEC has been overestimating the reserves by a third, and that we could enter into an oil crisis by 2014 when supply can't keep up with demand.
It's no mystery why Oxford sees a crisis looming. If you are to believe OPEC, then they have about 2.5 times the amount of oil in their reserves than the rest of the world combined. Just imagine the impact if they're doctoring those numbers. We could be talking about 426 billion barrels of crude oil, 13 years worth of oil for the entire planet, not just the Middle East, gone, up in smoke.
I was recently at Windsor Palace in England meeting with UK ministers and ambassadors from 12 countries, and I explained that we have a very serious energy situation on our hands. It's not one to be taken lightly. But I will tell you without any reservations that the extremists' view on peak oil is built on a myth. We won't go to sleep one night in an oil-rich nation and wake up the next day and it'll all be gone. The U.S. Geological Survey estimates we have about 2 trillion barrels of oil yet to be discovered. They believe that'll last us 70 years at current consumption rates. Now, the caveat to that is the idea of current consumption rates. With what we are seeing in China and the emerging markets, 70 years may be overshooting how long oil will last by a bit, but we won't go dry anytime soon. Here's the real situation. We have long reached and passed the days of easy and cheap oil. What we are doing to cope is transitioning from more traditional crude oil, the cheap stuff, to the unconventional forms like shale, bitumen, and oil sands. This stuff is much more expensive and energy intensive to get out of the ground and bring to the market, and it eventually means dramatically higher costs. We've got a race against time on our hands here, and we aren't going to win. What I'm about to say I was recently told directly by multiple ambassadors from the Gulf Coordination Council in a private meeting. They represent the oil interests of the Persian Gulf. So we're talking OPEC folks here. They told me that by 2014 they have to have a minimum, I want to stress minimum price, of $125 a barrel to maintain their economies in the Middle East. So without any other factors in play, that'll be the lowest oil can ever go again. But we know that there are always other factors that come into the oil game. So my take is that $150 a barrel will be the new norm very soon. What I mean by that is, we'll hit a point where regardless of whatever economic pullbacks and events take place, that will be the lowest price oil ever drops to. And that time is not that far off.
I'll one-up you, Kent. I think we could hit $200 a barrel, although we could see some quick panics if Iran decides to play geopolitical Russian roulette and blocks the Strait of Hormuz, for example. Or even worse yet, they break out into open conflict with Israel. Don't forget, a terrorist attack hitting an OPEC nation could have big implications for America, too. That could lead to temporary gas lines, dramatically inflated prices in the short term. And then $200 a barrel is going to look like roses compared to reality.
I agree. The solutions we hear politicians and so-called energy experts talk about on TV never take into account one alarming trend that's been getting worse and worse over the last century: the ratio of energy return on energy invested. Energy return on energy invested, or EROEI for short, simply measures how much energy it takes to get energy out of the ground. In the 1930s, you could get about 100 barrels of oil out of the ground for every 1 barrel you used. By 1970, that figure was 25 barrels to 1. Today, we're only getting about 3, maybe 5 barrels of oil for every 1 barrel of energy we use to extract it. It's another exponential growth curve. And what's unfortunate is that this trend is not likely to improve regardless of where we choose to drill, whether it's Alaska or the Gulf of Mexico. And as an oil guy, it pains me to say that. So if we find out we have some untapped treasure trove of oil somewhere deep underground, it will still be incredibly expensive to get it, simply because of this EROEI ratio.
It's undeniable that the United States conventional crude oil production peaked in 1970. 48 other countries saw similar peak oil situations, including Indonesia, which used to be an OPEC member. We just don't get the major oil finds anymore like we used to. The press went crazy when another big oil well was discovered in the Campos Basin in Brazil. As much as 250 million barrels of oil are believed to be there, but that would represent a fraction of what we found in oil's heyday. The Tupi oil field, also in Brazil, is a similar story. Now, some of the unconventional forms of oil are certainly getting a lot of press. Look at shale oil. At first glance, it's pretty exciting. In just the last 3 years alone, Texas has seen a 230-fold increase in their output of crude oil that's derived from shale. That's about a 23,000% spike. It's mostly coming from the Eagle Ford Basin. Unfortunately, the Eagle Ford Basin is believed to have only a total of 3 billion barrels of oil for discovery. And similar big shale formations in the Bakken in North Dakota can only deliver about 128 million barrels a year. It's small potatoes compared to what we used to find.
Here's another way to look at it. Global oil consumption is now about 89 million barrels a day. So we could theoretically use up all of the annual production of these big fields in 2 to 3 days. So we better hope there are trillions of barrels of crude oil lying under the water in the Arctic if we are going to place our chips down on oil for the long term. And that isn't a very safe bet at the prices oil is going to hit in the coming years.
Here's the thing. If more of the American public ask themselves two questions: one, what happens when oil becomes too expensive because the easy stuff just isn't lying there under the surface to grab? And two, what happens if we aren't prepared for it? They might be much more worried about their futures because this crisis will put more of a strain on the already dangerous exponential growth patterns that are present in our economy and our environment. And this will cause the data of the pyramid scheme's ultimate collapse to speed up.
The team has made its case that we are in for some hard times regarding oil. But maybe you're holding out hope for an alternative source of energy to sweep in and replace it. We'll discuss that next. But remember, you just can't flip a switch and transition to a new type of energy. It can require tens of trillions of dollars of investments in infrastructure and technology. And it's never been done quickly. Consider this. It took about 100 years to transition from wood being the primary energy resource to coal, and then another 100 years for coal to be overtaken by oil in 1964. So what viable replacements for oil exist? And until one steps up, will an energy crisis play a role in this pyramid scheme theory the team has presented? Find out ahead. But first, let me say that we are going to cover a lot of ground today. This is a very serious subject, and you deserve the real story. Energy is just our first topic. We're also going to review potentially catastrophic exponential growth patterns in our environment and economy. So at the end of this presentation, we'll show you how to claim a 100% free package that contains all of the proof and findings from our investigation today, an eye-opening book, plus reports that will reveal the steps to take to protect you and your family's wealth and way of life in the days, months, and years ahead.
Outside of wind and solar, the renewable energy sources don't offer the kinds of EROEI returns that we need to A, meet our exponential growth demands for energy, and B, fuel continued exponential growth in our environment and economy. But solar and wind are impractical for mass adoption and will continue to be for a very long time. Plus, neither gives us liquid fuels, no matter how high their EROEI ratio is. And liquid fuels are what we most need to run our economy. Methanol and biodiesel can't cut it either. And ethanol is so inefficient in many cases, it takes as much energy to produce as it actually contains.
We're going to be forced to lean on a lot of inefficient energy sources in the future, including oil. Take the Keystone Pipeline. The oil coming out of that is primarily from the tar sands. The EROEI for that is around 2.9, which is highly inefficient compared to what we used to get.
Coal is an interesting story too. We produce a lot of it, that's for sure. So much so that there are some experts who want us to believe that we have 250 years of it left in the United States alone. But you have to dig deeper than that. We are barely mining the high-quality coal. Anthracite, critical to steel production. It hardly exists in America anymore. Gone over the last 100 years. The low-grade quality coal, the subbituminous coal, we've got tons of that. That's why, over the last 50 years or so, we keep growing coal production by about 2% annually. But the energy we get from those bigger hauls is flatlining. So we're getting less from more.
We have one solution in front of us that can act as a bridge until we make some sort of breakthrough in a renewable option: natural gas. But I'm not quite sure it will help us all feel comfortable about the future. The big problem here is that while natural gas is very cheap, the infrastructure is not in place, and we'd have issues getting mass adoption without a complete government intervention, which isn't going to happen the way Congress and the White House behave with one another these days. But even with those hurdles, I think America is going to lean on natural gas as much as possible going forward. The EROEI ratio for natural gas is pretty healthy right now. It falls around 15-1, so it's much better than oil. And there's a whole lot of natural gas, an estimated 100 years worth in America alone. Plus, we've got 487,000 natural gas wells across 30 states right now. So some big positives there.
Unfortunately, by my estimates, we have 60,000 processes in this country that rely on petroleum. It's everything from growing and transporting food to household items needed to make our lives easier. For example, it costs $35,000 to convert a truck engine to natural gas right now, $18,000 for a regular car. And you know what? Out of 117,000 gas stations in America, only 500 offer natural gas to the public. And even though you have a country like France that offers 62 natural gas cars to choose from, here in America you'll be extremely lucky to find a couple at your local dealership. So even with natural gas as a viable option, we've got a long road ahead before it replaces oil.
The real negative is the time to start this massive overhaul of our energy system was in the 1970s when the US peaked in oil production. Fortunately, we aren't starting from scratch with natural gas, but since we haven't taken the necessary steps to integrate it into our society, I estimate we are at least 20 years behind the curve. And we don't have 20 years. We might not even have 5 before oil becomes too expensive for society.
So what we're left with is a very solid case that the first of the 3 E's, energy, actually guarantees that our pyramid scheme theory comes to fruition. Because if our energy system can't continue to grow exponentially, it definitely won't be able to power exponential growth in our environment, and certainly not in our economy. So I think we should talk about that next.
If our ability to harness cheap energy is limited, this will send shockwaves throughout our society. So a little later, the team will discuss what this energy crisis means for our country, national security, and your prosperity. But first, to further examine the pyramid scheme, we need to discuss the 2 other E's. Now, I want to reiterate something I mentioned at the beginning of this broadcast. The next chapter in the story has yet to be written. You can take steps to protect your wealth and your way of life. And don't worry about remembering every point made here today, because at the conclusion of this investigation, we will show you how to claim a 100% free package that documents all of the findings presented today, an eye-opening book you must read, plus a collection of time-sensitive briefings that reveal the options you have moving forward for your investments, life savings, and finances. So let's move on to the environment, the second E. You're about to discover why we may be struck by American food shortages in the coming years. You'll hear a startling 200-year-old prediction from an English pastor that may now be coming true. And you'll see why, by 2015, the world could experience armed conflict over water, not oil. Energy was just the first domino to fall. The next 2 will really drive home the fact that our future is one big pyramid scheme.
I always find it interesting to listen to people talk about the relationship between energy and the environment, mostly because I think the wrong story is being told. It's usually being driven by an environmentalist agenda. I'll let folks come to their own conclusions there. What I'm most concerned with is that just like with energy, we also rely on exponential growth patterns with many different aspects of our environment. Realistically, we couldn't maintain these patterns even if we had unlimited energy. But since we don't, it really is the final nail in that coffin. Now, it would be nearly impossible to investigate all of these exponential growth factors in the environment. So I feel we're really best suited to just focus on the two areas that people think about the most: food and water. By just linking those two areas to our pyramid scheme theory and showing how they are interconnected with our energy and economic systems, I think we'll be able to present a fairly open and shut case.
Well, guys, there's no question we've come to the right place to do just that. Look around, gentlemen. This is something that's going to go extinct in this country, your average American farm. For a long time now, we've been seeing less and less of these kinds of farms in the American landscape. And I predict, frankly, it's going to get a lot worse as energy prices surge. You can't grow food without oil. You can't fertilize it. You can't harvest it. You can't transport it. So what happens when energy becomes too expensive? Frankly, guys, I think you're going to see a mass exodus of small farmers in this country. Back in Thomas Jefferson's day, 9 out of 10 Americans made their living in the fields. When Abe Lincoln was elected president, that number had dropped to half. By the time FDR was sworn in, only 2 in 10 Americans made their living as full-time farmers. Now, that number is only 1 in 500. Frankly, guys, with fewer farmers, nearly 313 million mouths to feed in this country, where's the food going to come from? I think it's going to come from one place: factory farms. Agribusiness is booming in America, there's no doubt about that. But the basic economics in our food system in our country are pricing it right out of the average farmer's budget. I think all of this plays a big role in that second E in our pyramid scheme theory, the environment.
Here's what we know. The prices of food staples like wheat, beef, corn, sugar, and just about every food item are up big since the millennium. But so is oil. That's not a coincidence. Farmland prices have also been going through the roof lately. And that's because there is so much less of it now. Over the last 25 years alone, America has converted over 41 million acres of land into condos, strip malls, and other developments. That's the equivalent of removing Illinois and New Jersey from the map. Add it up. You've got higher food prices, higher fuel costs, more people, and less land to use for growing food. So farming now is more than ever a volume enterprise, and factory farms are the big winner there.
This is really interesting, guys, when you consider that last year farm revenues were actually the highest on record. Yet Time magazine actually found that 82% of the income average farmers bring in is now coming from non-farm sources. So what that means is that most average farmers have just become part-timers. Think about it. They've been driven out by the factory farms.
Now here's a scary thought. What if our future offers no other choice but factory farms? Big conglomerate entities instead of the kinds of farms we've known all our lives. I think we are left with no other choice here because of some very obvious exponential growth trends we're running headfirst into. The United Nations future population estimates form a near perfect exponential growth curve. And it shows you that we are well on our way to a tipping point here. More people put a larger drain on our energy needs. They require more food, more money, more everything. If you narrow the focus to just America over the last 100 years, you'll see that our food consumption patterns are growing even faster, meaning we are eating more food per person while our population explodes and our farmland disappears. So factory farms are going to be a necessary evil just to keep the food coming. But it's still unsustainable. The average person in this country is responsible for 32 metric tons worth of food, water, minerals, and energy from the environment every single year. China and India are modernizing at a rapid rate, so their populations will put more of a strain on our ability to divvy up the resources, at least in a cost-effective manner. The UN believes we have to double our food production by 2050 to meet the demands of growing world populations. Where's that food going to come from? Only about 1/10 of the land on this planet is suitable for farming. About 40% you could put cattle and animals on, so that's about half the land we can't do anything with. And we may have to embrace factory farms if we want to get by. But even those giant agricultural entities are going to fall victim to our pyramid scheme theory in the future.
I agree. Those factory farms require a lot of energy to operate. Right now, the cycle of bringing food from the farm to the markets takes up 2/3 of the United States domestic oil production, guys. The average American's food intake for the year requires 400 gallons of oil to bring it to the kitchen table. Not many people know that it takes a pound of diesel to make a pound of fertilizer. So if you've got a big family, you're just using a lot of oil to eat. We're going to need unprecedented innovation in how and where we grow food to keep up with the rising numbers of our population. We're going to need big technological leaps in plowing, fertilizer, forest management, you name it. But where are they? And will they appear in time to prevent a severe crisis?
You know, we saw phosphate fertilizer prices rise 350% from 2003 to 2008. And in 2008, food riots broke out in 40 countries. I don't think that's a coincidence. And I think American food shortages are not a matter of if, but a matter of when. To think we couldn't experience that kind of crisis would be foolish, especially when food prices will soar in the future. Plus, America currently imports 100% of its needs for 18 minerals and elements. We are already beginning to accuse China of hoarding minerals. This will only get worse as our demands increase and these resources become ever more scarce, which means we'll all feel the strain in our bank accounts. People without the necessary financial stability to afford these increases will have some tough decisions to make. Back in the late 1700s, a Reverend Thomas Malthus was one of the first to predict that the world's explosive population growth would eventually overrun our ability to feed ourselves. He was a highly controversial figure, but his theories have become a mainstay with many biologists and some economists. Malthus even went so far as to write that the power of population is so superior to the power of the earth to produce sustenance for man that premature death must in some shape or other form visit the human race. Pretty extreme words, and they didn't come true in his day or in the days that followed. But back in Malthus's time, there were only 1 billion people on the planet. It took another 123 years to hit that 2nd billion, just 33 more years to hit 3 billion, 14 years to hit 4 billion, just 13 more years after that to hit 5 billion, and then 12 years to hit 6 billion. And now we're at 7 billion and counting. It's a near perfect trend of exponential growth. And Malthus didn't have to deal with similar and equally dangerous exponential growth patterns in energy like we do now. So maybe his worries about peak food were early, but eventually they may turn out to be frighteningly accurate.
I think water will be a very topical issue in this country within the next decade. Look at where we're at now. The Potomac River runs through D.C., Maryland, Virginia. There are 7 cities right along this 7-mile stretch here. Most people don't think about it, but energy plays a critical role in our ability to use water. And we all know we need a lot of it to grow food. Unfortunately, water is also experiencing startling exponential growth patterns for agricultural use. The same pattern is appearing for our domestic water use and also for our industrial purposes. Water plays an enormous role in our pyramid scheme theory.
It sure does. I was part of a think tank meeting in Zurich a couple years ago that investigated the future of water. This is a much bigger issue than people realize. We concluded that the likelihood of armed conflicts arising over water will be extremely high by 2015. I'm talking about higher than oil or even democracy. That means it's an almost near certainty. What makes this notion especially hard to grasp for some is that we aren't running out of water. There's actually plenty of it, lakes, ponds, and oceans all around us. But we have the same amount of water on this planet now as we've had for our entire history. About 360 quintillion gallons. Guys, that's 360 with 18 zeros behind it. The problem is 97% of all water is salt water, so you can't drink it or use it to grow food. And converting it to fresh water is especially problematic because it's energy intensive and it's time consuming. That's another predicament all in and of itself, just because in the last 10 years alone, freshwater demand across this planet has spiked by 58%. Personally, I find that very startling. So right there, water becomes a big factor in all 3 E's, our energy, environment, and our economic systems.
Keith, you're absolutely right. These are the facts, and I think we can quickly see how they fit into our pyramid scheme theory. An average person consumes about 731,000 liters of water a year, either by drinking it or in the foods we eat. And that's even without counting our showers, car washes, or anything else we can think of. Now, Put that in perspective, with a world that's adding the equivalent over 8 New York cities worth of population annually, you can see the problem compounding and compounding.
The water around us here isn't what we need to be concerned about. Only about 1/3 of 1% of all the fresh water on this planet, just the fresh water, is found in rivers like this or lakes. The water that's a problem is way down beneath the surface, the aquifers. These deep wells are the lifeblood of cities across our country and entire regions of the world. And they're becoming unstable because it takes many human lifetimes to fill these aquifers.
Ken, aquifers don't get much press, but they really should. Look at the Ogallala Aquifer. It touches about 8 different states in the Midwest. It's massive. It provides drinking water for 2 million people. And is primarily responsible for 30% of the water this entire country uses for irrigation. Here's where the cause for concern lies. It may be completely drained within 25 years, and it takes 6,000 years to refill. That's a great deal of cities at risk of future water shortages, to say nothing of the agricultural issues.
Guys, you've got a very similar story with Lake Mead out in Arizona. That's the lake that helps keep Phoenix supplied with water. The Scripps Institution gives Lake Mead a 50-50 chance of being dry by 2021, but the problem is actually more widespread than that. In fact, you can go back as far as 2003 and see the GAO warning that 36 states are at risk because of serious water shortages by 2013 because of this aquifer issue.
You know, water's heavy stuff. If you can imagine a box, it's a little over 3 feet long on all sides, it'd take a ton of water to fill it up. So as these aquifers get drained, it takes more and more energy to raise that water to the surface from the deeper depths. This is a very big concern in some parts of the world, much more so than the United States. Which is why conflict could be a foregone conclusion with water. Half of the energy used in large parts of India now is spent extracting water from pipes that have to run from way down beneath the surface just for irrigation. China's water use over the last 100 years is a very aggressive exponential growth curve in itself, but they aren't alone. Pakistan, Mexico, the Middle East, and North Africa are all working off of borrowed time with their water supplies. Some of those places aren't exactly a model of stability. Now, here's something most people probably don't think of. Over the years, the United States has produced about 10% of the world's wheat, but we are the #1 exporter of it. Here's where water plays a really big role. It takes 1,000 tons of water to harvest 1 ton of wheat. And that water is not coming from rainfall, it's coming from irrigation. So when we are exporting wheat to countries with water issues, what we are really doing is exporting water. So if water becomes scarce in parts of the world, that will hike its value, which will hike food prices. And that will come back to hit average Americans because everything is priced on world availability, not just how much of it we have inside our borders.
Water scarcity also creates a massive energy security issue. Nuclear and coal power plants use large amounts of water to harness energy. Who's big in nuclear and coal? China. So if you can't easily get the water, you create a situation where energy becomes even costlier and water becomes more valuable than oil. In fact, half of the water consumed in the United States isn't consumed by people, but by electrical power plants.
Okay, I think we've made our case for a peak environment scenario, and that's of course tied directly to our peak energy predicament. I think we can talk about that final E now.
So let's continue to put the pieces of this pyramid scheme puzzle together. By now, you can see it's spreading out far and wide. World population took from the beginning of time until 1804 to reach 1 billion people. 208 years later, we're sitting at 7 billion. That's exponential growth. And it has had an impact on the total scope of this pyramid scheme theory. With our first E, I think the team made a compelling case that unsustainable exponential growth patterns show the days of easy energy are behind us. Looking solely at oil, we can see it's a poster child for exponential growth. Unfortunately, the process of extracting oil is becoming harder and harder because the easy stuff is no longer there. Oil's worsening ER/OEI ratio is its own example of exponential growth. Now, while there are some long-term opportunities, either the technology or infrastructure or some combination of factors isn't quite there yet for us to be able to quickly transition into a post-oil world, at least not before we feel the effects of crippling price hikes to oil. So that means we cannot continue to experience exponential growth with our energy system. That domino falling crashes into our second E, the environment. Our food consumption rates have been rising even faster than our population, and we've been fortunate for a long time to lean on technological advances to increase the productivity we've gotten from smaller and smaller amounts of farmland, from fewer and fewer farmers. But less easy energy will make it harder to feed the masses, and it certainly will make it more expensive. But expensive food and possibly American food shortages are only one part of that second E. We are seeing dangerous and unsustainable exponential growth patterns all over the environment. So what happens when you have peak energy and environment situations crash straight into an American and global economy that is dangerously fragile and on the brink of collapse? You have the makings of an unsustainable pyramid scheme. So that leads us to the final E, the economy. The team will investigate the dangers of exponential growth there next. But first, let me say that in a few minutes, we'll send you a 100% free package that contains all of the proof and findings from our investigation. This package includes an eye-opening book with information that has never been released to the public before today. And you'll be sent time-sensitive reports that will reveal the steps to take to protect you and your family's investments, wealth, and way of life in the days, months, and years ahead. It's imperative you get your hands on this information. So make sure you stay with us to the end of this broadcast.
So guys, here we stand at the epicenter of this pyramid scheme, Congress. And I think you can trace a good portion of the roots of this massive crisis right here. In fact, it was our friends inside the Beltway who dropped the ball on our energy policy. As far as I'm concerned, they're the ones who refused to create an atmosphere that promoted innovation and the technological advances that could help us curb these exponential growth issues in our environment. And they sure as hell are prime crooks behind that top E in our pyramid scheme, the economy. You guys know this. America is the biggest economy in the world, and it's showing a similar exponential growth curve as everything else we've investigated today.
Exponential growth is a complicated idea, and when you first hear it, its role in this pyramid scheme theory may not click right away. That's why when I'm presenting my findings, it doesn't matter if I'm meeting with the United Nations or a group of Americans, I always use the same scenario to help clarify the situation, and it applies perfectly when you look at our economy. Here's an easy way to understand exponential growth. Imagine that I have a magic eyedropper, and what's magic about this eyedropper is that when I put a drop of water out, it's going to double every minute. So I put a drop in your hand, and after 1 minute you have 2 drops, and after 2 minutes you have 4 drops, and after about 6 minutes you can fill up a thimble. So now let's take this magic eyedropper, follow me, we're going to go to Yankee Stadium, and I'm going to do 2 things here. I'm going to make this park watertight, and I'm going to handcuff you to the highest row of bleacher seats. It's 12 o'clock tomorrow, you're handcuffed to the bleacher seats. I go down on the pitcher's mound, I put one of these magic drops. Here's the question. That magic drop goes down at 12 o'clock. How long do you have to escape from your handcuffs? Do you have minutes, days, hours? Turns out you only have 50 minutes to escape from your handcuffs before that park is completely filled with water. That's not the important question. Here's the important question. At what time is that park still 97% empty space? And how many of you realize the seriousness of your predicament? It's those last 5 minutes where most of the exponential growth kicks in, the dangers present themselves, and chaos breaks out. I strongly believe that we are well into those final 5 minutes with the 3 E's: energy, the environment, and the economy. And since they are all interconnected, the pyramid scheme will soon come crashing down. You just need to know what that means and what steps to take with your finances, investments, and day-to-day life to prepare for it. When you break it down to its simplest form, our economic system is based on an absurd scenario. John Smith goes into a bank and deposits $1,000. The bank turns around and lends $900 of it back out. So that $900 makes its way into another bank, which loans out $810 of that, and so on. Because banks can legally lend up to 90% of their deposits right back out. After a little while, that $1,000 in real money is turned into $10,000 in fake money because of it being loaned into existence. This is how banks operate, the Fed operates, every financial institution on the planet operates in the same way. And what nobody talks about is the impact this is having on our total credit market debt. In the mid-1940s, our total credit market debt sat at around $351 billion, and our GDP was $223 billion. So you had a total credit market debt that was 158% higher than GDP. That was the high mark of that ratio for about 30 years. And we had World War II to fight back then to inflate it. But around the mid-1970s, our total credit market debt began to rise rapidly. Starting in 1970, it took 7 years to double, and then another 7 to do it again, and then 5 years to double again after that. We had a little bit of a slowdown in the late 80s and 90s, and it took 10 years for the next doubling. But then it only took 8 years to double again. And it's moving much faster than our GDP is growing. Where we were sitting at a total credit market debt that was 158% larger than our GDP in the early 1940s, by 2011, that figure was 357%. Right now, it represents about $691,000 for a family of 4 in America. It's unfathomable. Now, in order for the 20 teens to economically resemble any of the past 4 decades, we might reasonably speculate that credit market debt would have to double again to over $104 trillion. What about the 2020s? Are we going to be able to maintain exponential growth for our credit market debt to hit $208 trillion?
Of course not. At least not if a dollar is still worth anything resembling a dollar in today's terms, which it won't be. It's going to take a lot of energy, a lot of environmental factors, and a lot more gambling in our economy to give us even a lottery ticket's chance of continuing this exponential growth. This pyramid scheme is completely unsustainable.
You know, not to mention while we were busy loaning money into existence, we're also printing a great deal of it, all while our debt surged to astronomical levels. You know, eventually, foreign countries are not going to trust that investing in America is a safe bet. To this point, we've been fortunate in some respects that the European crisis has made us the best-looking horse at the glue factory.
Of course, the Fed really likes to just focus on the debt that's on the books. If we look at the total net liabilities figures, you'll see we've got a much bigger problem on our hands than just our federal debt tab. And that's setting us up for a situation worse than we've seen in Greece and across Europe. This is exactly what happens when we have an economy that is built on the same model as a pyramid scheme. One that requires you to falsely believe in the sustainability of loaning money into existence.
What we're seeing with the austerity measures in Greece and the deleveraging with banks is a pattern that's going to keep recurring for the next 10 to 20 years. There's simply no way around it with all the excessive debt in this world. Plus, there's an estimated $600 trillion to $1.4 quadrillion floating around the world right now in the global derivatives market. And a good chunk of that is actually tied directly to American banks. So the unsustainability of the American and European economic systems is really quite clear and very real. These idiots inside the Washington Beltway and their cohorts in Europe do not understand the realities of this situation. But when this fiscal nightmare, this pyramid scheme they've created over the past few decades runs into these energy and environmental issues we've discussed, it is going to be bedlam. The next round of global superpowers actually know this. It's why both their governments and their private citizens are demanding more and more gold, for example. Gold is a great barometer for what the world actually thinks of our economy and our dollar. And the clear message that they are sending is that they have no faith in us for the long haul. Gentlemen, we could actually spend weeks debating and analyzing the more dangerous exponential growth patterns in our pyramid scheme theory. We've in fact just scratched the surface. But I think we should now focus on what's going to happen exactly when this pyramid scheme collapses. What that means for our futures, and more importantly, how people should go about preparing their finances and their lives for it. Because even as scary as this situation is, there are still unprecedented opportunities that are not only going to allow for protection, but immense profit potential.
As I mentioned before, much of what you've just seen has been presented to governments around the world and the United Nations. They've shared their findings with them, and now Chris, Keith, and Kent have come together to bring their findings to you. You're the one who will feel the impact, so you need to know what all of this means for you and your family's well-being. They've given you all of the proof for what has happened in the past and what is happening now. But what comes next? And will you be prepared for it? We'll discuss that shortly. I also want to remind you to stay with us to the very end of this broadcast, because in a few minutes, I will give you an opportunity to receive a 100% free package that contains all of the proof we've discussed today, an eye-opening book that documents what the future may hold for us. And you'll also receive a collection of highly sensitive reports critical for maintaining and growing your wealth in an uncertain future. That's coming up ahead. But let's get the closing thoughts of each of the experts you've met today. This way, you can get a clear picture of what the future holds and what you need to do next to prepare for the coming crash of the pyramid scheme.
The next 20 years will be unlike anything we've ever seen in the history of the world. And those who aren't ready for what's coming will definitely look upon it as a catastrophe.
Nobody can talk with absolute certainties about what lies ahead in our path, but we can definitely make some assumptions based on the evidence.
The exponential growth that has occurred with our energy, environmental, and economic systems has reached a point of no return. It's not about running out of oil,
Or food, or water.
It's about not being able to keep up with the demands of society and the dangerous economic constraints that will put on our country and the world.
When these factors are combined with an American and global economy that's already on the verge of a meltdown, it's apparent that while we may be able to delay the date this pyramid scheme crashes, the only unknowns at this point are when will that massive crash occur.
How severe will the outcome be? And what is the best course of action for you to take in order to prepare and stay safe?
The first E, energy, is the piece of the pyramid scheme that has the most influence on the severity of the entire situation. Because when we reach the point where oil can't fall below $150 a barrel,
Or $200 a barrel.
When we hit that mark, it's going to cause a ripple effect that weakens those two other E's tremendously.
And if we get caught in some period, whether it's 10 years or 20 years or longer, where we are stuck between expensive oil and our transition to a mass integration of natural gas and other alternatives, it's going to stop the exponential growth patterns in the environment and the economy right in their tracks. When this pyramid comes crashing down, it will not be smooth.
We soon won't have the easy energy that would allow us to continue to cheaply extract necessary elements from our environment. Our food and water is going to become infinitely more expensive in the years ahead.
It could get so bad that average folks may be spending 30, even 40% of their disposable income on it. There will be areas of the world that experience increasing hostility around vital resources like water, farmland, and energy.
the fallout from this will be truly frightening.
When this pyramid scheme goes, when that last card is placed on the top of this house of cards, we'll enter a time where the laws of money no longer apply to individuals.
Where bankruptcies and restructuring involve entire nation states.
The world we live in right now has 10 to 20 times the amount of phony derivatives floating around than the entire size of our global GDP. It's unsustainable and impossible to rectify.
I expect to see the collapse of sovereign debt occur sometime in the 20-teens. Up to that point, I expect to see absolute desperation on the part of the federal government as they continue the aggressive money printing to accommodate all of the debt we've already built up.
They will punitively tax those who've been responsible with their money.
I believe we could see America enter into a period of devastating inflation where the dollar becomes nearly worthless. Like an exponential growth curve, it'll start off slow, maybe 8% by 2015. But then it'll rapidly speed up, hitting 10% annually, then 25%, then 100%, maybe even 600% a year.
Some parts of the country are already starting to prepare for this. Right now, there are no fewer than 11 places in the United States at least testing alternatives to the dollar in their local economy on a small scale.
And there's no wonder why. A new survey shows that it could soon take $150,000 a year of household income for a family to afford basic living expenses, save some money, and have a little left over for an occasional night out.
It's unbelievable. That's how weak some experts forecast the US dollar will soon become in a world economy. They don't believe that day is far off.
It's just one reason why the dollar will definitely lose reserve status at some point in the future.
Due to these harsh economic conditions, soon our governments may not be able to serve the truly needy. People think entitlements like Social Security and Medicare are obligations the government has to provide because Americans paid into the system.
Those people are wrong, and those programs are bankrupt now. Washington can take a hatchet to them anytime they like.
People can also forget about the FDIC. That can only cover a fraction of U.S. bank deposits.
It's a false sense of security.
Plus, state pension payments could get suspended. It happened in Argentina, and it happened in Greece, and it may happen in France, Germany, and here.
In an extreme scenario, some areas of the country may not have the revenue to properly fund the police, firemen, and other basic public services.
Now, as everything becomes more strained, society may start to unravel to some degree. Our rates of incarceration in this country are their own exponential growth curve, one that is rising faster than population growth.
This could get much worse as people have to make some tough choices on how they'll go about surviving in times where basic necessities become nearly unaffordable.
You've got 1.5 million people in this country living on under $2 a day. You've got 46 million Americans below the poverty line.
I believe our safety nets will become nearly obsolete when the pyramid scheme crashes, so you can guarantee crime will rise. It's not a positive outlook.
People need to avoid falling prey to their own beliefs. None of these things, admittedly, sound possible. None of these things, in fact, sound even remotely probable, but I believe they are as inevitable as the sun coming up tomorrow. The question is when, and what is the precise sequence of events that could lead to the collapse of the pyramid?
But given everything you've just heard, you have to understand that there are any number of outcomes that could change the severity of this pyramid scheme. However, you have to be aware of what's possible, and you also have to have hope.
Let me put that into perspective. In just over the last 100 years, this country has made it through 2 world wars, multiple recessions, and a Great Depression, a presidential assassination, 9/11, and a long list of other difficult times. Not only did we survive it, but the Dow still returned more than 22,000%. This pyramid scheme may be absolutely terrifying, but it's not the end game. If people want to put their hands over their eyes and think that these issues will solve themselves nice and smoothly, they're in for a rude awakening. The pyramid scheme will collapse on them and they won't have any way out.
But if you accept the realities of what's in front of all of us and plan accordingly, you could come out way ahead. Even though the days of easy oil have come and gone, there are huge opportunities for oil and energy-related investments for Americans. We are going to broaden our drilling. We're going to have more pipelines. And as oil becomes more expensive, there will be more windfall possibilities. But you also need to step outside your comfort zone into other energy opportunities. Natural gas is dirt cheap now. It won't be as demand for it rises and its slow mass integration into our society begins to take shape. So Americans should get into natural gas now. If you push more and more of your capital into energy opportunities, you may just find yourself quite wealthy even as this pyramid scheme collapses. In fact, I've identified 6 energy plays that could do just that.
When I first discovered this exponential growth trend, I moved well over 50% of my wealth into hard assets like gold and silver. That turned out to be a very smart move for me over the years. And I think it's going to pay off even further as gold hits, say, $3,000 an ounce over the coming years, or even $10,000 an ounce in an extreme scenario. But I also look to pay off all of my debt, because debt can be a minor annoyance in times of prosperity. When the times get bad, debt can cripple you. So while you have time, get out of all the debt you can, and then move on to diversifying your investment portfolio into heavy commodity plays. You need to get into food and farmland, water and utilities, plus precious metals like gold and silver. And certainly diversify your wealth out of US dollars as much as possible.
The important thing to understand is that the global shift isn't happening. It's already happened. Right now, 77% of the economic activity on this planet doesn't occur within the United States. It's happening somewhere else. Now, here's my favorite opportunity for this pyramid scheme crisis. You need to target what I call glocals. A glocal is a company most people think of as primarily American, but it's really a powerhouse international entity. In fact, I want to give you the top 3 glocals that have the most upside in the years ahead. We're about to be struck by a very serious crisis that will lead to tremendous realignment of social, political, and economic capital. It's going to negatively impact literally billions of people. But instead of taking a doom and gloom mentality with it, let's look at this crisis for what it is, the mother of all opportunities. You can not only survive the collapse of the pyramid scheme, you can come out of it wiser and wealthier than ever before. The way I see it, the choice is yours.
The team has presented their case, and now it's up to you to decide. Is our future one dangerous pyramid scheme that's on the verge of collapsing? If it is, it doesn't mean you have to fall victim to it. That was the real purpose of today's broadcast. Now you need to know the steps to take next. Money Map Press is one of the world's most respected financial publishers, reaching over 500,000 daily readers in 35 countries. And today, we want to help you stay safe from any outcome that was presented during this investigation. That's why we've prepared a critical package we want to get into your hands as soon as possible. It's called Conquer the Pyramid, an investment blueprint for the future. And it's 100% free. It contains an unprecedented arsenal of investment guidance and research necessary for protecting your wealth and helping you prosper during the uncertain years ahead. And who better to provide you with this insight than the very team that led you through this groundbreaking investigation? Your Conquer the Pyramid package includes a copy of Chris Martinson's thought-provoking book, Crash Course. In this book, Chris lays out the arguments for why we are heading down a dangerous path of exponential growth in our economy, energy, and environmental systems. You'll see the shocking evidence, the eye-opening charts, and the in-depth research. And Chris will prove that you need to question everything you are being told by Washington, D.C., special interest, and the media regarding our future way of life. I personally guarantee that after putting this book down, you will have an entirely new outlook on the days ahead. But here's something you'll find really interesting. For viewers of this broadcast only, Chris Martinson has prepared the Crash Course Hidden Chapter. The publisher has not even seen this portion of the book. In fact, it was never printed for mass distribution because Chris just finished it prior to this investigation's release. But it may be the most controversial section of the book because it contains the specific outcomes that Chris sees unfolding from the pyramid scheme that we expose today. But even more importantly, it also includes investment research and day-to-day choices you should consider to help protect you and your family's wealth and well-being during the historically troubling times that may be quickly approaching. Also included in this powerful package are 3 time-sensitive investment research reports, and they're yours for free as well. The first report is called The Great Energy Awakening. In this important briefing, Dr. Kent Moores uncovers the most exciting investment opportunities in the energy world today. He'll target the exact oil and natural gas stocks primed to surge in the coming years. You'll discover big pipeline profit opportunities as well as companies ready to tackle the growing electricity demands. You'll want to review this information immediately, as Dr. Moores has a history of uncovering big-time energy finds. The second report is titled AgriBoom. Here, Keith Fitzgerald will disclose a collection of lucrative opportunities you need to consider in the food, agriculture, water, and technology sectors. These stocks are positioned to capitalize on the exponential growth epidemic that will soon put more strain on the availability of many of the commodities we've taken for granted. And you'll want to pay close attention to what Keith has discovered because he has time and time again found exciting market opportunities for average folks. And the final report is titled Tomorrow's Overtakers. It's a powerful read also prepared by Keith Fitzgerald. Now, turning through its pages will reveal the top 3 global stocks you need to look into immediately. These are the corporations that have strong international ties and are set to dominate their markets in the coming years. As an additional feature to this bonus report, Keith will also give you his predictions for gold. Plus, he will share all the details on the single investment he believes you must make in order to capitalize on this precious metal's future surges, as the dollar continues to crumble. The total value of your Conquer the Pyramid package is $334, but the information in it is so important. As long as you are one of the first 1,000 people to respond today, you won't have to pay a penny for it. Money Map Press is proud to be footing the bill so that you can get the facts on this very serious threat to our way of life. But just as importantly, you can get solutions that can help you stay safe. To claim this powerful package, all you have to do is sign up for a 100% risk-free trial subscription to Money Map Press's flagship publication, the Money Map Report. With the Money Map Report, you will have the opportunity to leverage Keith Fitzgerald's uncanny ability to predict massive shifts in political, economic, and social issues. This way, you can take the proper measures to grow and guard your net worth. It was the Money Map Report that first warned readers in 2007 of a coming oil price surge that would strike Americans the following year. It was the same publication that warned of the dangers of credit default swaps causing a total market collapse in 2008. And it was the Money Map Report in early 2010 that was sounding the alarm about an impending Greek crisis that would create a chain reaction meltdown throughout Europe and much of the world. But this publication isn't just about warning you of coming dangers. Over the years, Keith Fitzgerald has also delivered Money Map Press readers a long list of phenomenal market winners. Your subscription to the Money Map Report comes with monthly editions that are both emailed to your inbox and delivered to your mailbox. You will also receive weekly briefings and unlimited access to a members-only website where you'll find a powerful collection of exclusive bonus reports that can help you kickstart your portfolio. So let me recap everything you are about to receive today. You are going to be rushed a copy of Chris Martinson's thought-provoking book, Crash Course. You will instantly receive the Crash Course unpublished chapter that has never been released to the public before today, and you cannot get it anywhere else but here. You will also have immediate access to the 3 bonus reports: The Great Energy Awakening, Agriboom, and Tomorrow's Overtakers. If you are one of the first 1,000 people to order today, you can claim everything we've discussed at no additional charge by claiming a 1-year subscription to the Money Map Report for only $49. It's a comprehensive solution because you have a very serious threat in front of you today. And that's why Money Map Press has priced this research so that the average American can capitalize on it. Now, to make sure you have enough time to review everything you are about to receive, Money Map Press will be including a 100% risk-free 90-day refund period. So take 3 months to read Crash Course and the bonus chapter. Review all of the bonus reports, the next 3 issues of the Money Map Report, and every past issue. If at any time during those first 3 months you feel this publication isn't right for you, simply contact us and you will receive a complete refund. And you can keep the Crash Course book, the bonus chapter, all of the reports, and the 3 issues of the Money Map Report as our gift. It's now time for you to take the first step towards protecting you and your family's future from the coming crash of the pyramid scheme.